execute a contract to buy, and then we assign our rights and interest of the contract to a new buyer, right? That's an assignment. The third one is an option agreement. We execute an option to buy, and then we assign or resell to a new buyer. We can assign our option, or we can buy it, close it, and then resell it to a new buyer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take some time and we're going to really go through all three of these different methods. It's important that you really get this part and you really understand when you get a deal, which structure can you use to then wholesale that property, what's going to make the most sense, what's going to make the most money, and what's going to be the easiest is really what we want to talk about. So method number one, buy and resell. So what we do is step one is you buy. You get the property, you get the seller to contract to sell to a wholesaler, that's you, using a purchase agreement contract. So use a standard purchase agreement, whatever form you use in your state, get the right form for your state. You know, go to a realtor and get what's already been through legal and is approved and so on. Every state is different, so that's why we don't give out specific contracts, because I don't want to give you something that's obsolete or it's not in compliance, or you know the laws change all the time. So make sure you're using contracts that work in your state. Remember, real estate is state by state. It's regulated on the state level. So you want to make sure you're using the right forms and contracts. Step two is to sell it. So now that you have it under contract, the wholesaler, you become the seller. You're going to contract to sell to a new buyer using a purchase agreement contract. So let's take a look at an example and see what this looks like. This will really help illustrate this a little better. Let's say a seller of a distressed property agrees to sell to you, and I'm going to call you the wholesaler, for $100,000, and both parties execute a purchase agreement contract on June 1st with a closing scheduled for July 1st. So 30 days later, you're going to close. Now, once you have that property under contract for $100,000, you're going to turn around now as the wholesaler, and you're going to find a new buyer, a different buyer, willing to pay $115,000. Remember, you got it for $100,000, you're going to find a new buyer for $115,000, and then both parties execute a purchase agreement contract on June 5th, right? So remember, you got it on June 1st to buy, you enter into a contract on June 5th to sell, with a closing, guess what, scheduled for July 1st. Now, let's look at the closing on a buy and resell closing. We're going to do a back-to-back closing. So the first closing, July 1st at 10 a.m., the seller closes with you, the wholesaler, for $100,000. Now, you have to have the funds to close. You're going to show up with your $100,000. You're also going to pay closing costs.
Not the way.
You're going to pay a closing fee, proration of taxes, you know, any of that kind of stuff that you have on a closing. You're going to pay all of those fees as the buyer. Now, at 11 o'clock, 1 hour later, you're going to turn around and you're going to sell now to that new buyer. So you now become the seller, right? You're going to close with the new buyer, excuse me, for $115,000. Now, you, the wholesaler, who is now the seller, you're going to pay capital gains, right? Because you bought it for $100,000, you sold it for $115,000. You're going to pay capital gains, you're going to pay transfer tax, you're going to pay closing fees, you're going to have fees that you're going to incur. Now, the one benefit of this, I guess, is that the wholesale fee is not disclosed to the original seller.
He said the only benefit of this way is the wholesale fee is not disclosed to the seller.
The person you sold it to doesn't know that you just bought it an hour ago for $100,000. None of that has to be disclosed because it's two separate closings, right? Now, my little disclaimer here is that be sure you understand what you can do within the legal ramifications in your state. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know all of the rules in every state. I do know that this is how to structure a back-to-back closing. All right, now, what are some of the pros and cons of doing a back-to-back closing? Well, the advantage is that your wholesale fee is not disclosed. The end buyer who paid $115,000 does not know that you paid $100,000. Now, is that crucial? Is that necessary? No. Sometimes it's better if the end buyer doesn't know how much we made. In this case, they don't need to know.
You'll see why.
That we made $15,000 less fees. It's just nice if they don't have to know. You know, some of our other structures, you'll see that they do know, and that needs to be okay. Now, there's some disadvantages to the back-to-back closing. One is that you pay closing fees twice. You pay it when you buy, you pay it when you sell. transfer tax, capital gains tax. You're paying all of that on the sale.
That's why he said 15,000.
And you have to come to the first closing
for all this
with the money, right? Even if you borrow the money, you're going to have it for an hour. It has to fund until you turn on a close and cash out. So in this case, you'd have to have transactional funding, or you'd have to have cash, but you'd have to have the cash to close on the first. It used to be where we could fund the closing on the first with the money from the second. It was really awesome. We used to do that all the time. Well, now the title companies will no longer do that. I haven't heard of that being done in a couple years now. I don't think any of them are doing it. You could try to structure something like that, but I really don't think it's likely. Okay, method number 2 is what we call an assignment. So here's an assignment. Step 1, seller contracts to sell to you, wholesaler, using a purchase agreement contract, right? Nothing different there. Here's where it's different. Wholesaler contracts to assign all rights and interests of the purchase contract to a new buyer using an assignment contract. So now what you're doing is you're assigning your contract to a new buyer. That means that new buyer steps in and takes over the position of the buyer in your place. And guess what? For a fee. So here's what this looks like. Seller of a distressed property agrees to sell to you, wholesaler, for $100,000, and both parties execute a purchase agreement contract on June 1st with a closing scheduled for July 1st. Nothing different there. Here's where it's different. Wholesaler, you find a buyer willing to pay $115,000 and you assign your contract. It's called an assignment contract. You assign your rights and interests of the purchase agreement on June 5th, right? So let's say it took you a couple days, with a closing scheduled for July 1st. Really, the closing's the same because the new buyer is stepping into your contract. Now, here's the cool thing. We get to the closing. It's one closing. Cool, single closing.
I feel like someone like you said, whoa, why am I doing 2 closing charges? Nah, make that sign. You gotta change it.
But be right. And then, plus we don't got 100,000 to buy a house because they make you have the money up front.
Right.
Wouldn't do 2 closings.
Right. It's like, nah, we gotta change this shit.
Right.
Yo, the
so it's like, all right, let's figure out another way, and this is the way. They found the right way.
Right.
They found the right
assignment.
The closing's July 1st at 10 a.m. The original seller closes directly with your buyer for $115,000. So the seller gets $100,000.
Probably Jerry low key. He said, "Nah, I ain't doing that one."
Guess what? You, the wholesaler, get an assignment fee right on the closing, right on the settlement statement for $15,000. Buyer and seller pays the fees, not the wholesaler.
Right.
You don't pay any fees. You walk out of there with a $15,000 check. The fee is disclosed. Both parties know that you made a $15,000 fee. It's right there on the closing statement. Yep. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah,
assignments are the way to go.
He said they're the way to go. I didn't even need to teach you that other one. Really.
Right. He's just how to tell you niggas though.
You don't need any money to close. You bring 0 money to the table. Isn't that awesome? Now there's some disadvantages, obviously. Wholesale fee. If the wholesale fee is disclosed, so if either party doesn't like that you're making $15,000, then the deal could fall apart. It's important that you wouldn't have this house on assignments. You want to make sure that both buyer and seller are still happy with their contracted prices.
Would you hear that though?
Sometimes what I've seen happen is once your fee is disclosed, sometimes the new buyer thinks they're getting taken advantage of, and it can kind of turn into where they're feeling unhappy with the transaction. Typically, if you're looking at a $5,000 or $10,000 wholesale fee, it doesn't tend to be an issue. Once you get up over that, I've seen it become an issue. Now, the wholesaler, here's the one disadvantage. The wholesaler is still obligated. If
15, nigga, you have to give me 5.
In other words, you cannot assign liability. Just because you sign an assignment contract with your new buyer doesn't mean that if they fall through, you're not still obligated to the contract. So if for whatever reason your new buyer flakes out and doesn't show, you are still obligated, which means if you don't close, you're subject to the consequences of your contract, which means you could be forced to close, or you could lose your earnest money, or whatever it may be. So make sure your new buyer who you've assigned to is on board, right? Okay, now, assignments work very, very well with private sellers. The one thing that you have to make sure you have when you do an assignment is you have to make sure that your purchase agreement is assignable. In other words, it has to have a clause in there that says that you have the right to assign all rights and interest of your contract. If you don't have that, then you technically are not allowed to assign your contract. So make sure you've got that. It's a little clause in your purchase agreement that allows you to be able to do that. In fact, let me tell you a really cool story. This is a 5-way assignment wholesale deal that I did. So what happened on this deal was, this was like I told the buyer number 4 here.
But there was like 5 people in say one
the seller got his $4,000 out of there and signed a wholesale.
Yeah, everybody made money too.
So it's got to do structural wholesale is by using an option agreement. So here's how an option agreement works. Step 1 is to buy. So seller agrees to sell to a wholesaler, you, at a specified price and time. So it's got to have an expiration date, using an option agreement contract. Now, here's some of the things that you need to understand about an option agreement. The seller is obligated to sell to you according to the terms, and typically for an option agreement to work, the wholesaler pays the buyer pays the seller an option fee, right? That's the consideration. But here's the cool thing. The wholesaler is not obligated to the seller, but if you don't close during the time frame that's specified, you will forfeit your option fee. So it's not an earnest money, it's a fee. It's a fee that you put down, and the seller gets to keep that fee if you don't exercise your option within the specified time. But it does not obligate you. So if you don't, then there's no obligation, you just lose your option fee if the terms aren't met by the due date.
That's interesting too.
So let's look at an example here. When you go to sell it now, you have 2 options. So you could do option number 1, which is the wholesaler buys, or the wholesaler, which is you, meets the terms of the option agreement. You contract and purchase the property. Then you turn around and, as the seller now, contract to resell to a new buyer.
Yeah, that'll be when we have more money, if we can do something like that. Okay, so we controlled the deal. Now we will find the deal.
Okay, welcome to this training module, Finding Deals. Now, in this part of the training, what I want to do is I want to talk about something a little bit differently. Right now, as of this recording, I really strongly believe that off-market deals are where the biggest opportunities are right now for finding deals. And that's why I created 2 different softwares. If you've got access to those softwares, then go to that part of the training center. It's on your right-hand side. You can click on those modules. You can learn how to set up your search criteria, how to look for those off-market deals and underpriced deals. Those are the 2 different softwares I've got. And those are really, in my opinion, the very best way to automate and systematize finding deals online, which is where a lot of motivated sellers are going right now. As I've explained, and as I believe right now in the marketplace, it's very, very competitive on-market deals, which is on the MLS and at auctions. That's where a lot of the cash buyer competition is going to find their deals. But I still think it's important to be looking for deals. I still think there's a way that you can do really well with on-market deals, especially the MLS. Over the past 10 years that I've been a full-time investor, I've done a lot of deals. I still do deals from the MLS. So I want you to also have that as a tool in your toolbox for finding deals. So in this training, I'm going to primarily focus on the MLS, how to find deals with real estate agents and using the MLS. I'm going to go into detail about that in this Finding Deals module. Again, for learning how and setting up your software for off-market deals, make sure you go to that section in the training center. There's modules for how to get set up, for how that works. Very, very cool software that allows you to go after these off-market deals. But again, in this module right now, I want to make sure that I give you the nuts and bolts for on-market deals. Markets always shift. It may go back to where there's more opportunities with on-market deals, meaning REOs and short sales and distressed properties that are actively listed with agents, also with auctions. But so I want to make sure you get that foundation, you get that training. This will be very in-depth right now. I'm going to give you very detailed information for how to really be successful working with agents and on the MLS. So let's get started. Now in this section, we're going to talk all about finding the deal. How do we find deals? And maybe you've heard the saying, you make your money when you buy, right? Well, we hear that.
All right, I don't think we need to do that right now. So, I did that. Okay, did you put some more stuff in there?
Yeah, but I haven't really gone over them. I was just putting stuff that I thought might look good. But now I'm thinking, look up the off-market ones.
Oh, those are the on-market ones. These are on-market deals?
They were vacant houses, but that's all
That's off-market.
Mm.
On-market's on the MLS, the button that we can click up there for the MLS. So let's look at some of these. So either 10704 St. Catharines or whatever. It's a pretty high price. $225,000 is the estimated value of this house. Personally, I want to stay in the low 100,000s right now because I don't know. I gotta find the players first.
The one that I checkmarked was the one I like. Is it? I don't know if it shows.
Let's see. I don't know.
The 5, 7, and 11.
5, 7, 11. I don't even see that. Kevin's homes. Let's see. Okay, now I can see that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Got a bunch in here already.
But that's the one I liked so far.
So it looks like the last sale was a while ago.
I know that's the only problem. We went closer. I guess I also had the 6919.
You don't necessarily want it closer, because the owner of this is an out-of-state absentee, so that means they're not even there, and the property is vacant, and the owner's not there. The name's Tyrone Keith. Let me see what this place looks like. Why don't you show me some pictures or something? You looking it up?
That's what that looks like.
It's 5711. Is there any more pictures?
No, it ain't like yours.
Vacant. That's a good house. Tyrone Keith. Tyrone Keith. Let's see here. This is Zillow. Can't deal with that button. I'm gonna type it in. East 100. says 1.5 bags for 22 bed. Ideally, you want 2, but 1.5 in your bed. Okay, time.
Social has 2 bed.
2 what?
Bags. So it's like, which one's which? Who knows?
You gotta skip trace these. That's the only thing that we're missing. We need skip trace.
What is it?
Yeah, we gotta fucking skip trace these numbers.
It's got fireplace. It's company.
You see my house? Yeah, to me, Tyrone Keith's out here. Let's be doing randomly. Gotta find this nigga Tyrone Keith. Looks like his mailing address. Like so they have his mailing address and shit. So it looks like this nigga's balling. That's his house.
Oh. Wow.
So it's like he might have. See, he looks like he could be potential cash buyer. And we could buy this place from him. His house is fucking spectacular. We gotta send that nigga a letter. Type shit. That's the only way to find his fucking number.
Right.
Or get his contact at all. Tyrone Keith. But we can find him on Facebook now, maybe. Because we know more of his information. But maybe not. Maybe he won't disclose that type of information on his Facebook.
Yeah, there's the mailing address. I see.
But that wouldn't hurt though. To mail him. Straight up though, just send him mail.
Right.
That's the only way. That's the only way to contact this nigga. And we got to send it through the business. We got to look at Mr. Keith, blah 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 blah. So you have a property. You own a property at this address. Was wondering if you was interested in selling it for an all cash offer. And also wondering if you had any other properties or things of that nature. Blah 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 blah. It just had to look official. It just had to look official. You know,
Yeah.
everybody opens mail, even if
Right.
it's bullshit. They open it, especially handwritten mail.
They're gonna that probably work because it shows some You got to put work into writing a letter.
Right. So we have the mailing and stuff. So I'm gonna take a quick picture. That way we don't have to always just pull it up. And that one is. Okay. So that's a good one. I like that one.
And yeah, if he has a house like that, he could be a cash buyer regardless if he sells his house.
Right.
Be like, yeah, you give us this house plus you looking for any houses?
Right.
Type shit.
Right. Alright, let me go to the ones I got real quick. See what I was talking about. That's the Bell Watson. I've been trying to find this for a while too. I see his millions. Yeah, we're gonna have to mail these niggas. Because until we get skip trace, until we can figure out, I think, let's see, it's probably Lead Genie. I have to pay for the skip trace. That's what it is.
I thought wasn't there one on here?
Yeah, there is, but you gotta pay for this too. Which is like, damn, nigga. I thought it gave them to you. Let's look into it real quick.
Right. I said it cost 20 cents a thing.
Right, but it's like the 200 was just for the program. You gotta add more money now. You just put another $100 in, but it'll last probably for as long as you need it to last. It's like, damn, nigga, 300.
You watch enough videos, this nigga's about getting it.
Oh, man.
You want the information, it's gonna cost. He gives out a lot of free